Hi, everybody. My name is James Dobbin. I head up financial and professional services at Procurement Heads, and I'm fortunate to be here today with Alexei Burns, who heads up the procurement function at Castle Trust Bank. Alexei and I were very fortunate to, well, I was fortunate to work with Alexei recently. I actually placed him into what was at the time very much a greenfield function. So welcome, Alexei.
Thanks, James. Yeah, good to be here. Nice to talk to you again. Always is. Yeah, it's been a tremendous kind of 5 months actually. If I think about the sort of journey so far at Castle Trust, which I'm sure we'll talk a bit about over the course of the next half an hour or so.
Absolutely. But before we get into that, it'd be great just to understand for the audience, how did you get into procurement, Alexei? Because you were from more of a technology background beforehand, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So I guess really, if I think about my sort of way in, which I think is like really interesting conversation point, if we think about the different ways that people can come into procurement, I think that's probably it's a kind of byproduct of being a function that has lots of different sides to it. But I guess it was really from a vendor management perspective is kind of how I crept in through the procurement back door. So I was working as an engineer in the unified communications space, and there was an element of vendor management that was needed in that role, just the way in which the organisation was kind of laid out. And for me, it was a kind of almost a novelty at first, and actually then it became a little bit more work, and actually I found it like tremendously rewarding when we were coming to activities or conversations that were kind of beneficial for both parties. I found that, like, I think it's quite natural to do so, but it was quite a fulfilling kind of way to spend my time. So I thought a bit about it, and then that eventually kind of organically grew as the organisation changed and grew. We effectively, through some acquisitions, came to the conclusion that actually a procurement function in of itself was something that we needed to do as a company. So I was lucky enough to be in that position where I was already starting to go down that road, and then it kind of snowballed from there really. So that was my way into procurement, which I think is probably quite common. I think if we think about like direct learning pathways into procurement, actually it's always going to be the case that people kind of, excuse the cliche, fall into it purely because of the lack of kind of direct learning pathways into it.
Fantastic. And are there any successes at this point in your career that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I suppose there is. I think that if I think about like successes that I'm really proud of, I think if you're part of a procurement team, I think you have lots of little wins, and you're on the bus, and you're moving in the direction of that procurement team. But I think as a like kind of leader or someone that's accountable for the function, there's a realization that you're never going to win it on your own. And actually, for me, defining a strategy or a purpose or a mission statement is fantastic, and it's obviously very important to be credible in the way in which you go about doing that, and to get the right type of buy-in at the organisation. But success I think I'm most proud of is seeing kind of my team buy into that, and then sort of own that themselves, and then watch this kind of, this seed grow and grow into something that kind of has arms and legs and evolves into something that may be much different to what it started out to be. So I think from a success perspective, that's kind of what I'm most proud of, is actually seeing people kind of buy into the strategy, and then kind of take ownership and be passionate about it themselves.
And fast forwarding to your current role, which hopefully in the way I positioned it to you has materialized in the way that you'd expected. How's it been heading up a procurement function in a sort of, greenfield procurement function in a fintech sort of challenger bank? How's that journey been over the last 5 months?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's been, eyes wide open. It's certainly been fast paced. It's been fast paced and it's been exciting. But actually it's been really good in the sense that procurement's role is well understood by the bank. And actually, if we think about the kind of core domains that procurement plays in, fundamentally they're understood and accepted actually, and we have a lot of advocates within the firm that understand the value that procurement can bring. So I think that's fantastic, and then I think it's a case of really building on top of that and underpinning it with a strategy that makes sense, both in terms of a people perspective and then a process and technology perspective, but also making sure that we're allowing the business to grow in the speed at which it needs to grow. So there's kind of, there's two parts to it, I suppose. There's the functional strategy and how we move procurement forwards and how we kind of move the dial. And then there's the piece around actually acting as a facilitator for the business to allow them to move at pace and the pace that they want to move. So yeah, it's been a really interesting 5 months actually. I think we've made some really, really good progress that we're now looking to build on throughout the rest of the year.
What's it like reporting into technology? Because usually it's more traditionally sort of finance or ops, isn't it? But you very much report into tech, don't you?
Yeah, well, interestingly, so I actually report into the CTOO. So he actually has two hats. So he's the CTO, but then there's also the operational element as well. And I think we're very technology centric as a bank. I think that's very deliberate. And if I think about kind of where we are really pushing the boundaries in the fintech space and really trying to kind of push the envelope as to what's possible for where we are, I think that technology is a massive enabler of that. So being at the heart of that and being part of the senior management team for the bank as a whole, it's fantastic. But then being on the leadership team from a technology perspective is really, really good as well, right? Because we're really, really close to the action, and it allows us to kind of make sure that we're delivering value in all of the right areas. So yeah, I think from a personal perspective, it's really interesting. I think historically I've worked in organizations where actually we've sat in different places, whether that be finance, whether that be operations, or whether that even be HR. So to kind of sit in the space that I'm now is, again, it's another lens to look at things through. So yeah, I found it quite interesting, and it's kind of giving me some new insights that maybe I hadn't had before.
What aspects of your role do you both love and equally find quite challenging?
I think that's a good question. I think something that I kind of have a disdain for, but then love for in equal measure, is probably the kind of the cyclical nature of procurement. I think probably of business in general as well. I think it's like a concept that scales up and scales down. If you think about the do within procurement, and we might think of, a stakeholder or a category or a business requirement that has there is a beginning, there's a middle and an end to it. And then we think about, our supply base and our contracts that we have within that supply base. Everything's cyclical, right? So you might have a contract that's 1 year or 3 years or 5 years. And I think the challenge is you've got to try and kind of marry those things together to make sure that within that cycle, that contract life cycle, you can fulfill all of those different business requirements across your different stakeholder map. The concept scales. If we think about like functional strategies, again, it's the same type of thing, right? You might have a functional strategy that is kind of on paper 2 or 3 or 4, even 5 years in its duration, and you might have a technology strategy that complements that functional strategy. That's cyclical, but actually people don't work necessarily in the same way. So if you have a management team that sign off on a strategy and implement that strategy, and it's a 3-year exercise, if that management team is phased out or through natural attrition changes over the course of 1 to 2 years, you've got a challenge there, right? Because you have a cycle that's midway through and then you're coming in, and I think you can get kind of opportunity or kind of risk in equal measure as part of that. And I think for me, that's something that I love and find challenging, because we're always working in and amongst all of these different cycles, and you're trying to find the sweet spot to operate within, which I find is, sometimes I think you end up with the kind of square peg in a round hole, or sometimes everything seems to come together, and it's this kind of sweet symphony for a time.
So obviously you're working in a greenfield role at the moment, in one of the fastest growing sectors in the UK. I imagine you probably have to wear many hats on any given day. What does a typical working day look like for you?
A typical working day. I mean, I think there is a typical working day at the moment, and that's because we're being kind of very deliberate in how structured we're trying to be. We've got a number of initiatives in flight that are part of our kind of strategy, and actually it's important that we are measuring ourselves against our progress on a very kind of regular basis. So we do have kind of daily team check-ins at the moment. So for me, a typical day would be that team check-in, to look at across our different initiatives, what are our key kind of activities for that day, what blockers do we have which might potentially kind of cause an issue with some of the outcomes that we're looking to deliver. And then I think there's a piece on a daily basis that I'm taking a lot of time on at the moment, is around our kind of supply base, to actually nurture our supply base. I think that we've grown very rapidly as an organisation, and actually as part of that, we've developed lots and lots of relationships with lots and lots of different suppliers. And really where we are at the moment, we really need to nurture our supply base, and we really need to kind of move up that maturity curve very quickly in terms of understanding our supply base and having those right type of engagements with our suppliers. So that's something that we're spending a lot of time on at the moment. So typically on a day-to-day basis, I'll be spending some time on that. And then I guess it's kind of, there's two parts to it really. There's the piece for myself around, from a functional ownership perspective, trying to push the envelope for procurement, and really try and kind of sell the story and talk a lot about what procurement can offer within the organisation, to kind of foster those right types of relationships, because we are at the moment still in this kind of embryonic stage where we have real opportunity to kind of land ourselves quite far up in terms of where we sit. So that's something that I'll be spending time on. And then I guess finally, there's the piece around the bank as a whole. So I'm lucky enough to sit on the senior management team for the bank. So there are lots of activities and responsibilities that come along with that. So part of my day will be spent on that, really trying to kind of help progress the company more widely, and there's all sorts of things that we do as part of that. So yeah, I think a typical day is quite structured at the moment, and I think that we're kind of we're seeing that paying dividends actually in some of the progress that we've made over quite a short space of time.
Fantastic, great answer. And just in terms of all of our interactions over the last kind of 6 months, Alexei, I've always found you quite forward-looking as a procurement professional. And I recall we had a really great chat in person about the kind of future trends in procurement and future job roles that we might see. Do you want to just talk about that a little bit in terms of what you're seeing?
Yeah, sure. I think it's something that people have spoken about for a long time, certainly as long as I've been in procurement, right? So we talk about procurement's kind of value proposition, and we talk about the kind of core skills and capabilities that are needed within a procurement function. And we've been through this kind of iterative journey of trying to kind of release ourselves from the shackles of some of the more administrative type things, to move to this kind of more digitally led kind of strategic advisor that have a whole host of really exciting and intelligent kind of capabilities that can deliver value to the organisation. Now, if I think where we are now, I think procurement is becoming more technology centric. So I think it's less kind of anecdotal now, and it's more that we're seeing that on a day-to-day basis. We can talk about all sorts of examples where procurement has kind of really stepped up to the plate from a technology perspective, and then as part of that, they have evolved and adapted as an organisation or as a function. When technology was first kind of came about, I mean, clearly technology has been used in some shape or form for a long time within procurement, but actually technology was implemented around traditional procurement teams, and those traditional procurement teams would kind of wrestle with that technology to try and make it work for them. And that's absolutely natural. But I think that time's kind of moved on a bit more now, and actually through organisational changes and natural attrition, it's allowed teams to kind of restructure and build teams with technology in mind. So that kind of technology first approach, because it's been some time now, and again, we talked about the cyclical nature of things earlier. If we think about the way and the movement in which cycles tend to work, we've had a few cycles now and technology's become more mature, and actually now we see teams that are built around technology rather than technology being overlaid on existing teams. And what that's meant is that there are different types of people that make up a procurement function, whether that be, you know, the role of a business analyst, as an example, is a good indicator that actually they're probably using technology in a different way to how technology was being used within procurement kind of 5 or 6 years ago. I think technology's creating capacity and capabilities that is effectively driving procurement's value proposition further forwards. And we can talk about examples, you know, through COVID, and we can talk about, you know, examples through some of the supply chain disruption that we've seen over the last kind of couple of years. And technology is a massive enabler for procurement. I think procurement are now getting to the point where they have that core kind of capability, and actually it's much easier to move much faster now because we're all kind of more digitally native and we're all kind of more susceptible to the use of technology.
You see blockchain playing a big part in the future of procurement?
I do. Yeah, I do. I think blockchain is quite a kind of big topic of conversation. I think blockchain's like an onion, really. There are lots of different layers to it. So there'll be lots of different use cases for blockchain. There'll be lots of different kind of layers to the blockchain application and how it's used within an organization. And also, it won't just necessarily be about how blockchain is going to be used within procurement. It will be how blockchain is used within an organization, and therefore the role that procurement has to play within that organization, how they then have to interact with that blockchain. So clearly, like from a smart contracts perspective, if we think about like the layer one within a blockchain, obviously you can very easily get to the point where you can say, well, I can see how smart contracts could be used within a business, and therefore I can see how procurement are going to play its part in that. But actually, blockchain will be kind of fundamental, I imagine, you know, over the next kind of 10 to 15 years. We'll see even more of the kind of exponential rate at which technology has been adopted by organisations. We'll see blockchain move very quickly up that curve, and therefore we'll see procurement and other functions having to adapt quite quickly to the use of blockchain.
Thanks for that. We could go a lot deeper on that one, I think.
Yeah, no, and I think you and I, we've had a couple of conversations like this, and it's easy to get into, you know, some really interesting debates about what the role of procurement is going to look like in kind of 10 years, and actually how businesses are going to operate in kind of, you know, 10 to 15 to 20 years. It is really interesting. I think it's probably one of the reasons why I've been very keen to kind of try and experience procurement in different ways. So sitting in procurement across different industries, but also sitting within procurement across different sizes of organisations to kind of see and feel how procurement is from an end-to-end perspective, to really try and gauge, well, what does this mean? Where might we end up, and how might procurement play a different role in different types of organisations as things like blockchain mature?
Okay, last question. If you could give any advice to your younger self, what would it be and why?
If I could give some advice to myself, it would probably be like something I tell myself quite often is, and look, this is nothing new, right? I'm not being original here, but it's just very simply like 2 ears and 1 mouth. Like, we have 2 ears for a reason, and actually, I think I've spent probably, you know, a long time spending time talking, where actually it would have been far more valuable just to listen. You've only got to go as far as building the example that if you're sat in a room with 5 people and actually you're the last person to talk, you've got the benefit of those first 4 people that you can actually use to either kind of challenge your thinking or kind of back up the idea or the notion that you had to begin with. So that would be my one piece of advice, would be to listen more and to talk less.
Well, look, thank you very much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure as always, and I look forward to catching up again soon.
Thanks, James. Take care.
Take care.